Hello everybody and welcome back to 3D Printing 101. Today we're going to be talking about slicers. Now, we already talked about slicers earlier, and if you've gotten to this point, you should have already used one. And in week 1, we used Cura Slicer. This is, I believe, the most popular slicer in the world. And it's probably the best one. There are other kinds of slicers, and if for some reason you need to use those or you want to use those, then that's okay. A lot of the things that we go over in here are going to apply to those as well. So stay tuned. But why is slicing actually important? So as we talked about, your 3D printer reads files in G code. G code is made by the slicer, and it controls everything about your printer while it's printing. It controls the temperature, it controls the movement, the extrusion, everything. If your slicer is not properly set up, it's going to be much harder for you to achieve good looking prints and good functioning prints. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, if I pull up Ultimaker Cura, here we are. Close to this for now. This is the main interface. So at the top you have the Prepare, the Preview tab, and the Monitor tab. Most likely you're not going to be using the Monitor tab. You can set it up if you would like, but it's a little bit more difficult and not necessary. But we do need to use the Prepare and Preview tabs. We're going to use those pretty much every single time. In the top left here, we have File, Edit, View, Settings, Extensions, Preferences, and Help. Mostly we're going to be using the File tab. Here you can start a new project, you can open files, and it has the same function, the open files, as if we go into Prepare, this button right here. So those two are basically the same thing. Save project, export, reload all models, and quit. Now that we understand that, let's click on here. This is where you can select your printer. Depending on the printer that you have, it's going to have a different build plate, and it's going to have different, just settings in general. So some printers are going to require certain types of G code that work well with that printer, and others are going to require others. Makes sense, right? So here I have my printer selected, but we can also, if we click Add Printer, add a networked printer. We don't have any of those right now. Non-networked printer. So it comes up with the Ultimaker printers first because this is an Ultimaker slicer. But if you have a non-Ultimaker Cura, which most likely that's you, then you can scroll down. You can scroll down until you find it, and then the printer brand will be here. So let's say I have Anycubic Chiron. Click on that. Click Add, and now it's a totally different build plate compared to Ender 3 Pro, and we can switch back between them at any time. So I'm going to click Manage Printers, Anycubic Chiron, remove, because I don't actually have one of those. Boom. So if your printer's already not set up, if your printer is not already set up, do that now. Now, here, you'll see PLA, generic PLA, 0.4 millimeter nozzle. So as we talked about again before, your 3D printer is going to have to print different depending on what kind of filament you're going to use and what nozzle you're going to use, because it's taking 1.75 millimeters or 2.85 millimeters, and it's squishing it down into, in this case, 0.4 millimeters. But there are 1 millimeter nozzles. There are 0.6, 0.2, 0.1. So that's why that is important. The material, if you click on material, you'll see generic, and that's what I use most of the time. And then you'll see ABS, ASA, BVOH, CPE, and these are just all of the most common types of filament. And it's just generic, so it's just kind of the average for what those filaments would require. If you have a specific kind, you can scroll through here and click on which one you have. But right now I'm just going to go with generic PLA. If, let's say I wanted to make a project with PETG, I would not want to print with this because the temperature would be off and then other settings would be off as well. So I would just go up here, generic PETG. And then it's going to ask you if you want to keep or discard changes, because if you've personalized and modified manually certain information on here, then it's going to ask you if you want to keep that or change it. I'm not actually going to do this. I'm going to switch back to PLA. Say keep changes. Okay. And then again, for the nozzle, you can click through here. So let's start with this. I'm going to use this model as a demo piece. It has been printed a lot of times. If we go to files, it's got hundreds of thousands. This one has over a million downloads. So I'm just going to, let's see, Baby Yoda v2.2 .stl, download. Ooh. There we go. And so yeah, like we talked about, you can click here or you can click File, Open, and then Downloads. But let's say I've got so much stuff in my downloads that I can't find it. You can also just go here, boom, boom. At least that works on Mac. I'm not sure about Windows. So here we have it. This is our model, and it's placed on our build plate. By default, it gets placed in the center of the build plate. But let's go over, actually first, so to move around this model, my perspective around the model, click the scroll wheel and move it to pan the model. Hold the right clicker and spin, and that's just gonna allow you to spin. And if you scroll in, you'll zoom in. If you scroll out, you'll scroll out. So how do we actually move the model? Let's say we want the model to be facing that direction. So take this, and let's, from here in the top left, on the left side, at the top of here, you'll see the move tool. You can also click T in order to enable this. But this, when you click this, that's going to allow you to move the model around. And then I'm just going to go back here. And let's say I only wanted to move it in this direction, but I liked this and this. Just click this, and it locks the other two in place. And same thing goes for here. But it's not actually, it is not going to be good if you try to print it like this. So don't do that. And then here again, doesn't really work. If the model is dragged outside of this, this light rectangle inside of here, it's just the space where it's printable. The dark areas just show that they're part of the printer, but the model can't hang over there. So it just represents the build area. So let's say it's overlapping a little bit, the whole thing turns gray. It won't print it. So like if I try to slice, unable to slice. Please fit within the build volume. Are assigned to enable extruder. Yeah. So we're gonna, if we want to send it back to the center, you can just click center selected and boom. Now let's say we wanted to point this model to the right. If we go back over to the left, you can click rotate. It's the second one down. So rotate, you'll see these three rings. The red represents going, rotating it in the front direction, this direction. The green represents going around like this, and then the blue represents like this. So if I want to get it pointing that way, it's going to go like that. And then you'll also see the degrees are shown And yeah, let's say, it's not the case with this model because it is lying flat down, and that is usually how it's going to be. But let's say we have something and it comes and it's like oriented like this or something similar. Then you go over here to rotate, and then here you'll see reset, and that'll reset just the orientation, but we don't want to reset it right now. We want to lay it flat. So if we click on lay flat, it's just going to make it printable basically. So it'll pick the biggest flat area and it'll move it to the center of the build plate. Let's see. Boom. So now the bottom is correctly lined up with the bottom lined up with the build plate. So that did take a while, and sometimes that's not going to work, or sometimes you're going to want to choose a different face than the one that it would select. So what you can do in that instance, let's say we go back, or back here, you can also click this one, and this one I honestly use way more than lay flat. It says select face to align to the build plate. So if we click this, then you can click on red. Because the red is a face, it's just going to move it straight there. But if let's go back, we can also do that with other faces. So if I click on this, see, it just gets weird. So, but just know that that is a possibility. You can click any face on the model. Click his head. Yeah, there he is. Okay, let's go back. If for some reason you have a very complicated model, or you have to orient it, you have to orient it very manually to get it in the right direction. Maybe you have a bunch of pieces laying down, or it's a weird shape, and any of that stuff. If you click just back on the rotate tool without any of these selections, then here it locks in place. And if we click snap rotation, it won't do that. Even if we have snap rotation enabled, we can just hold shift and it'll do the same thing as having snap rotation off. Okay, so now we know how to rotate. Let's go to number 2. That is scale. Scale is what's gonna allow you to make your model bigger, or it's gonna make it smaller. So by default here, you should have uniform scaling selected. What does this mean? So if we drag on this cube, it's gonna make it bigger. But notice it keeps the proportions. It doesn't just drag it out and make Baby Yoda super wide. Grogu, rather, sorry. And you can do that with any of them. You can even do it just with the white in the middle. So that's pretty big. And back here, you'll see it has both the percentages that it's increased, and they're all the same because it is uniform scaling. And then this is also just the dimensions of the build. This is also super helpful information. But let's see here. Let's say I want it to be 50%. I could shrink it down and be like, look at it, 50%. Or you can just highlight it, 50, and because uniform scaling is on, we don't have to do them all manually. If uniform scaling is off, and we drag this one up, dude just gets super huge, just gets tall, doesn't get any other stuff. Like, that's just not right. Right? So no matter how much I change this one, it's not going to change the other dimensions. Now he's just like pretty flat. That's not nice to look at. So I'm just gonna go here, 100, one hundo. 100 and 100. All right. If you notice that the sidebar is grayed out, that just means you don't have an object selected. It can't, have this pre-selected all the time, because sometimes you will have multiple models that are on here at the same time, and it wouldn't know which one to select. So if I have this object selected, and you can tell because it has the blue, shown on the very outside. Now we're going to go to the mirror tool. So the mirror tool, click on here. Very simply flips it over one axis. It mirrors it. This doesn't have to be overcomplicated. This is all you need to know. You flip it, it mirrors itself. It's very easy to use. There we go. Now we're back to normal. Actually, we're not back to normal. The text is backwards. There we go. Back to normal now. Next, we have per model settings. Print as support, modify settings for overlaps, and don't support overlaps. This is a little bit more complicated, but we'll get into it later. The bottom two here, per model settings and support blocker, we're going to come back to those. They are very useful, but they're a little bit more complicated, and it's going to be easier to understand them once we go over some other things. Okay, so now we have the model fully oriented. That's what this section over here was for. Let's dive into the right side. So on the right side, we have the print settings. If you want to get rid of this box, you can click here. And if you want to get it back, just click on here. So the basic settings, the presets, the ones that you're going to be changing the most often will be shown in this small box. If you click on custom, you'll get to the more advanced features, but we're just going to click back to recommended for now. So the resolution, like we've already talked about a little bit, the resolution is just how tall is each individual layer. If you have a low quality resolution, or a higher number, so 0.28 millimeters, then it's not going to look as good. If we slice this, take a look at it, preview, it's very obvious where all of the layers are. You can see it super clearly. Now it's still going to give you the same basic shape, and there are instances where you might want to use this, but it is going to be black here. If we go to super quality, 0.12 millimeters, that's less than half of the height of the low quality. We slice this. It's going to have basically twice as many layers, over twice as many layers. Now see how much of a difference that makes. If we zoom in on here, the layers are much smaller than the other ones. So especially on curved surfaces like this, it's going to be more clear when you have smaller versus larger layer heights. The most common one, the one that I personally use and most people use the most often, is 0.2. That's standard quality. This is just a nice happy medium between the two. If we go to print settings, infill percent. So this is, if we go back to preview, slice. The infill percentage right now is 20%. So if we take this thing over here, this is what the infill is. It fills in the inside of the object and makes it stronger. That's it. So it goes all the way out, all the way through the entire print. And yeah, look at that. It's beautiful. It's honestly just beautiful to look at. If we didn't have any infill, let's see, this is 549.54 right now. If we didn't have any infill, let's see. It's 4 hours, 3 minutes, 28 grams. Saves a lot of plastic. But if you look in here, it's totally hollow. You might, again, there are times when you're going to want to use everything. If you spend enough time with the hobby, you're going to go through basically every setting that there is. But, 99% of the time, you're not going to be using zero infill because you could, like a baby, maybe not a baby, like a small child could crush this easily. So, 20% is generally a good place to start. If you go to 100%, that means that 100% of the inside is filled in with plastic. It's just a solid block. So this is going to be heavier. It's going to take more time, more material, and a lot of times it can cause it to fail. But if you have a small part or something like that, something that needs to be super strong, or it's just like a small piece that's going to fit inside a mechanism or something, yeah, this could definitely be a good way to go. So I'm just going to go standard quality, 20% infill. There's also gradual infill on many slicers. So gradual infill, if we slice here, gradual infill is more complex than just normal infill because in areas that the slicer thinks will tend to be weaker, places near the sides, near thin pieces, it'll make the infill density higher. It'll make it more concentrated. So if we go through here again, yeah, you can see here on the sides, it's very, very dense. On the ears, throughout the whole thing basically, especially on the sides, but throughout the whole thing, the infill is pretty high. And then it has this grid in the middle where it doesn't think it's going to need as much supports. This can save you time. It can save you, money if you're trying to make it. If you're trying to just make it lighter, there are some times when this would be helpful. Definitely, when you start printing large, complex models, then yeah, it's definitely going to come in handy. But I would say right now, not super important. It's harder to track as well. So if something goes wrong with gradual infill, it's less like, oh, I can just make this little tweak here. Whereas if it's at 20%, if you're like, oh, it's a little bit weak, just bump it up to 30. Support. So if we slice this right now, it's not going to have any supports because supports are turned off. So here we are in preview, and yeah, there's nothing supporting it. If we go back to prepare, all of the red is where the supports would be. Depending on the angle that is currently inside of Cura, that's saying if it's steeper than this angle, then add supports. That's what all of the red is. So if we were to print this out, it probably wouldn't go well. If you look down here at the hand is definitely a place where we need supports. If we go to preview and we bring this down, it just starts printing in midair. That is not generally a good sign. It goes through, let's see. It goes through, 50 layers before it finally connects. If you have one layer that goes through before it connects, it's almost definitely going to fail. So we're definitely going to need supports here. On the sides, especially because of the wrinkles here, and because his arm is down more. If it was up like this, it might be fine. But because his arm is down more, I think we're probably going to need supports here as well. So bring this up. The ears, the angle, a good rule of thumb that people used for a while was if the angle is 45 degrees or less, then you're good. If it's 45 degrees or more, then it's not good. But in reality, it's going to depend on so many things. depending on your 3D printer, your layer height, and just a bunch of different factors, how well it's calibrated, it's going to be able to achieve most likely higher than 45 degrees. I have definitely done, 60, 65 many times. Some people can get higher, but yeah, it depends on so many different variables. So there's nothing I can just tell you and it's going to work 100% of the time, and that's going to be your limit. You're going to have to try some stuff out. Sorry to burst your bubble, but you're going to have to try some stuff out for yourself. So let's add support. If we click support, it's going to add support to all of the places that are red right here. So yeah. Preview. Yep. All of the blue is support material, except for the base. The base is adhesion, but all of this blue, if we go through here, is support material. It's not printed like the rest of the model because it's not actually a part of the model. It's designed to make it easy to take off of the printer once you're done printing. But yeah, it holds the print up while you're doing it. So now if we see here, actually if we look here, it's not actually, that's not going to cut it. This is not going to work because it's still going to be printing, from thin air for a while. So what we're going to do in this case is we're going to go to custom, and we're going to go to support. So support's down here. Generate support on. Support placement touching build plate. That's what's selected right now. So yeah, if you look around, at no point does the bottom of the supports come in contact with the print at all. Take a look here. It works to avoid these things. And in some cases this is going to work because you're going to have something that just happens to work with this. And it's going to have some positives because supports do a lot of times leave marks on your final print. So that's something that you're going to have to either deal with or figure out how to remove in post-production. So if we click everywhere, and slice it, yeah, now it is absolutely everywhere. Everywhere that, like we talked about, the red was shown. Every bit of red has the support. So let's go back here. And if we go back to the fingers, kind of our proxy for success, yeah, at no point does it start just from thin air. There's a little bit of a buffer just so the two don't stick together. But really, it looks like it should work. Now, because this is more complex, the finger area, it might actually be hard to remove the supports without damaging the model. And in reality, we don't need this many supports. Printers are much more capable than this. So what we can do is we can go back here to support overhang angle. I have it set right now to 40 degrees. And like we said earlier, your printer can do way better than this. So I'm going to go back into prepare. And so if we take a look at the red now versus, if we change this to, let's say 50 degrees, way less red. Way less red. Still think it might be a bit much. Let's say 54. Now let's see what happens. There's still quite a lot of plastic. But there is definitely less. Let's see. I think what's causing the biggest problem here is all of these little small details. There's just the texturing all over here. Yeah, and just because of that texture, if you're printing something that has texture, even like the text on the bottom, because it has all of these different angles, it's small enough where the supports don't really affect it. But yeah, all of this red, it is at that angle, but because it's so small, it doesn't really get impacted by it. So you're not gonna need support for this text most likely. But yeah, I think it's the texture. So one thing you can do is we can go to the bottom on the left. It's support blocker. So if we click on support blocker, we click here. Support blocker. You're going to be able to block out where the support's going to be. It's basically just like the eraser tool. So let's say none of these I don't really need any of these, but if we go somewhere higher in the model, like if we slice this right now and take a look at it, if we slice it right now and look at it, there's all of this. But I really don't think that we need it, for example, on the front of this scarf. So we're gonna go to prepare. Let's zoom in on this a little bit. Click support blocker. And if we just go there, say there, right there, anywhere that's red that doesn't look like it's going to be too steep, I'm just going to add this. Even up here, there are little red spots just because it's going in and out and in and out from the texture. All these little areas, they look small right now, but they can add up to a pretty big support structure. Just go through, I think the face details, they're small enough where it's not really going to affect it. At a certain point, just if something is so, like, if it only goes out like a millimeter, sometimes you'll have things that go even less than that, because it doesn't need to be a millimeter. It sounds small right now, but once you have something that's 0.6 millimeters, you're going to be able to see it. So small details like this, I don't think they really need it. Again, it's going to take a little bit of toying around just to see. Here on the sides, probably good without it. Let's see. The ears, I don't think we need it on the inside of the ears. I think on the bottom of the ears, it's definitely good. But the inside, I think is going to be okay. And then, yeah, little detail right here, just from the texture and everything. And then just around where we have the texture. So keep going through, just making little changes. and it's gonna have a big difference. All right, that looks pretty good. Now if we slice this, there's a massive difference. You can see kind of the outline here of where it was. It's a huge difference. So all these little details, these things that probably weren't even going to be affected before, it's just, it's not affected by it. But we do still have it in the important areas, like here, the bottom of the finger. It's supporting the ears. The ears might actually be fine. Go down here. Yeah. Looks much better. Much better. If you want to change what you can see in the preview tab, actually we'll come to that later. So now that we know kind of how to do that, we can also change certain aspects about the support. Just like we can change the density of regular 3D prints, we can also change that in the supports. So what we're gonna do is, Cura had an update recently where they don't show you all of the settings, because I guess to make it easier to use. But if we go to customize here, actually, if we go up here, right now it just has custom selection. But if we go to, let's see, basic, that's the same, advanced. If you click on advanced, you're gonna see way more settings. If you click on expert, you're gonna have even more, but advanced is enough for me. It's gonna get you most of the places you need to go. And after you watch this video, or you watch it a couple times maybe just to fully understand everything, you're gonna be able to understand how to use advanced pretty well. So support structure. There are tree supports, which ooh, this hurts a little bit. we spent so long on the tree supports, or on not the tree supports, but on all of the support blocks, but I have to get rid of them. So if we now we have all of them gone, and if we view this right now, we're going to be back basically to where we were when we started. It's going to have supports everywhere. It is going to be, on places other than the build plate, but it's going to be everywhere that's red. Just a Goliath amalgamation of support material. But back and prepare. Normal versus tree. If you select tree, let's see, doesn't really change much of here. So, tree supports are definitely going to be a bit more complex, and you're gonna have to try some stuff. But the idea of tree supports is making it so that you don't put supports anywhere where they're really not necessary. It can kind of bend and flow with your project instead of just going straight up and down, which will work most of the time. The just going straight up and down, just normal supports. But yeah, sometimes it's gonna get more complicated. I'm not gonna go too deep into tree supports right now, but know that is something that you can use. So back to normal. We've gone through support placement, overhang angle, support pattern. Right now it's set to zigzag. Right now it's set to zigzag. So the support pattern is just where, what the support looks like. Just like the infill has its own pattern, this has its own pattern as well. Yeah, so zigzag kind of just goes back and forth like this. Look at the blue. If we go to, let's see, go to gyroid. If we slice with gyroid, now this is what it looks like. It looks very, very different, right? Very, very different, yeah. So that's something you can toy around with. The support density, just like the infill density, it's just going to change how much support material is in each of the supportive objects. Let's see, the layer thickness, most likely you're going to want it to be set to what the layer height is. And then, let's see, where is Z-hop? Another thing, you might have to go into expert for this. Yep, support Z distance. If we read the description, the distance from the top or bottom of the support structure to the print. This gap provides clearance to remove the supports after the model is printed. This value is rounded up to a multiple of the layer height. Affects support top distance, support bottom distance. It's affected by layer height. So this is going to change. Right now it's set to 0.2, and because I have the 0.2 millimeter layer height, that means when it's printing the supports. So basically what this means is after it prints the supports, it's going to print it up to here. There's going to be a section, a one layer section, where it doesn't print anything. Nothing. It's just going to be space. And then after that, it'll print the rest of the model on top. You don't want it to be too big, or else the supports aren't going to do anything. But somewhere between 0.2, 0.4, sometimes 0.6 is generally a good option. I'm gonna go back into advanced because that was just a lot of information. So now you know the basics of support. Adhesion. Adhesion is, we talked about before, adhesion is going to allow you to get your prints to work better. If you have something that doesn't stick well to the build plate, if you're having warping issues or other things, adhesion, and it's selected right now. If we deselect it, deselect supports just for demonstration. If we go to adhesion, there's no adhesion right now, and there's just this line. This is what we call a skirt, and it basically just primes the nozzle before it starts printing, but it doesn't actually hold anything down. It just, sort of prepares it, and it can help with the first layer. If we go to, where's adhesion? Build plate adhesion. The other types are brim, the brim was actually created because someone took a skirt and they made it closer to the model, and they just made it bigger, and that's what you see here. So the brim just acts as a tiny little layer that you can peel off or cut off sometimes, and it helps just hold it down a little bit. It does serve, again, to prime the nozzle before it gets started, but mostly what it does is, it holds it down. So if it gets to a point where it wants to start warping, then it'll be like, no. And then, the sides of the brim might go a little bit, but the brim is going to be removed anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And then you have raft. Raft it's just a thick piece that gets printed before the model gets printed itself. It's kind of like the stage, if that's how you want to think about it. It's the base you see here. In this case, what is it? 3 or 4 layers thick. And yeah, this is just designed, again, to peel straight off. Once you're done, you can break it directly off. Yep, you'll see it there. There are, you can make small changes to this in settings, but mostly you're not going to need to, because it's not actually changing the model itself. it's going to be changing what prints around the model, the things that are helping it out. Infill. If we go to the expert settings, or not the expert, the advanced settings, expert has a lot of stuff, more than we need. So if we go to the advanced settings, you'll see the infill density again, and then the infill line distance. That's the distance between the printed lines, and these things kind of work together. The line distance and the infill density. Infill pattern is cubic. So you might be like, Caleb, that's not cubic. It's hexagonal, triangular, whatever. It is cubic because all of these things, might be kind of hard to think about right now, but every one of those is just, let's see, if this is the cube, it's tilted like this, and it's tilted like this. And it allows it to be super strong because then you have triangles upon triangles upon triangles. But it all also stacks, so you can stack multiple cubes next to each other. So that is what cubic means. There are different kinds here. Cubic is generally the one that I use. Sometimes I'll just experiment with other ones, but cubic is generally what's going to work best for you. Infill line multiplier, not super important right now. Layer thickness. Your infill layer thickness is just going to be whatever your quality or your layer height is for the rest of the print. That's basically it with infill. Material, you can click here and you can change the print temperature manually if for some reason if you have a special kind of filament, or you need to change something for this print. You can change the printing temperature, the initial layer, the initial printing temperature, and that's just what it's going to be at different times in the print, and then the build plate temperature as well. Speed is speedy to figure out how to use. You can just control the speed of different kinds. Now, for most printers, somewhere between 60 and 70, 75 is going to work best. Because if it's going too fast, it's not gonna be able to keep up, and it's just going to be really inaccurate. Because the filament needs time to come out of the nozzle, and it needs time to cool down. Because when it cools down, it hardens. So speed, I have it set to 60 right now, and when I change this, it automatically changes all of the other ones. So you can manually change these, but if you click the top, it's just gonna automatically change these ones that you think. Let's say I want the top bottom speed to be 50, which generally you want it to be slower than that. I can just do that. But if I set it to 60, it'll automatically set it to, in this case, half of all the other ones. Travel speed, that's just how fast it moves between printing and the initial layer speed. Yeah, the initial layer, like we talked about, the initial layer is just, you want it to go slower usually, and that's gonna help you get the most out of it. There are some other settings that you can use, but those are really the ones that you're going to be using the most often. One more thing we need to go over is wall count and top and bottom layer count. So if we go into custom, we go to top and bottom. Here you can see the top and bottom thickness, top layers, bottom layers. So because our layer height is set to 0.2 millimeters, 0.2 millimeters times 4 equals 0.8. 0.8. So that just means it's going to print 1, 2, 3, 4. Then it will start the infill. If we go to walls, the wall line count is 3. So that just means that it's going to circle on the outside 3 times. The wall thickness is affected by the line count and the line width. So here, yep, you see the wall line count 3, 0.8. 3 is usually pretty good. Sometimes you might want to up it to 4, and if you're doing a test print, sometimes you can get away with 1 or 2. But that's really just for test prints. I'd say 3 is the minimum if you want a nice finish on your print. So now that we understand how all of these settings work and how to change them to do what we want, if we go to the top here where it says profile and standard quality, if we click on this, you can actually see we have the original ones that we saw back in recommended. So the 0.12 up to 0.28, but we can also create our own profiles. So if we click here, create profile from current settings / overrides. So let's say I want to call this Caleb's, let's call this 3D Printing 101 profile. So now we're using 3D Printing 101 profile. So if I close Cura and open it again, I can click back onto 3D Printing 101 profile, and it'll go to all of the settings that we have selected right now. So if you're working on a project, or you just really dial in your settings, and you just perfect everything that you've done, save it as a profile, and you can come back to it later. You don't have to try to write everything down, figure out what you did wrong. You can just save it as a profile, and that's just a super easy hack to save some time. So a final thing that I want to go over. So back in the preview tab, once we've sliced our model, just want to go over a few more quick things. So if you want to adjust the different things that you're looking at, if we go to this middle section, we can click to see which things we want to look at. So helpers are going to be the blue. So if we deselect that, we won't see the raft. Shell is the outside. Now we can just see the infill. Kind of weird. So if you were trying to look at any specific item, you can do that. Personally, I want to look at all this. The travels I don't usually check, but sometimes it is helpful. But usually I leave that unchecked. Another thing that is cool that you can use is X-ray view, and honestly I don't use this very often, but it does look pretty cool. So yeah, usually you're not going to be using that, but yeah, in the preview tab here, if we click on the bottom, you'll see there's a play button right here, and if we drag this back and hit play, it will actually show us the movement of the nozzle as it goes about the final layer. So this is the final layer. that's the only thing that's going to be on the final layer. But if we drag this slider on the end, is to change viewing the different layers. So if we drag this down, let's see, we drag it right there, then we hit play. Now we get to see the entire path of the nozzle. This is not to speed. The actual printer is going to be going much faster than this, but here you can see if you have somewhere where it's printing, where it's just floating, or if something is just clearly not going to work, you might be able to catch it in here before it actually happens, before you waste filament and waste time and potentially damage your printer. Back to the sidebar. You can use this sidebar. You can also drag from the bottom. So if I just wanted to get a little tiny snippet of this, I can do that. And this just makes viewing things easier. But most of the time, you're gonna be adjusting the top way more than you adjust the bottom, because you just don't need to adjust the bottom very often. So at the bottom here, you will see the information that slicing it has generated. So you'll see the time And yeah, again, this is just an estimate. It's not actually going to take 6 hours and 9 minutes. I mean, it might, but most likely it won't. The shorter the print is, the more accurate it's going to be. But once you get longer like this, it could be 6.5 hours, could be 5.5 hours. So don't make all your bets based on this one estimation. You'll also see about how much filament it's going to use, 59 grams or 19.83 meters. But again, this is not totally accurate. And then, yeah, if you click here, you'll see a full breakdown of what that's going to be. So it's here, it says infill 130, 25%, inner walls, outer wall, all that good stuff. So we can save this to disk, and this it'll just show a place in your files to save that. But if I have an SD card and I put that SD card into my computer, then save to disk it'll automatically sense that there is a drive in there, or this applies if you have a USB stick or a full-size SD card or anything. It'll automatically detect that you have a removable drive, and this should pop up. But let's say I had this in, and either I had multiple drives, or I had a hard drive attached, or I just wanted to save it to straight to the disk, the storage on the computer, then I can click here. But if I click Save to Removable Drive, I don't have to go into Finder or whatever file management system you use. At least on here you don't, and it'll just automatically save it. But before you remove it, make sure that you eject it. If you don't eject it, it can cause problems either with your computer or the files or the chip itself. So click eject. And it says safely remove hardware. Eject untitled. You can now safely remove the drive. And this disappears. So now we know how to export files. A few quick things though before we go. 1, keep it simple. We went over a lot of stuff today, but make sure that you keep it simple. The KISS strategy, keep it simple, stupid. You don't need to use every setting that we talked about in here, probably until you get to your second roll of filament. A lot of these things just apply to the more complicated projects that you're going to do. But don't feel like you need to use all of these things or understand all of these things, because I understand it can be overwhelming. But just start. If you've gotten to this point, I've said it before, you're ahead of 95% of people. Most people don't get here. So just keep making slow progress, keep learning something new every day, and you're just going to keep leveling up. You've already been doing so great. One thing, if you are a late night worker, or you just like having a dark mode, if you go up to the top, you go to preferences, configure Cura, and in general, you click theme, Ultimaker. You can click Ultimaker Dark, or you can click one of the colorblind assists if you're colorblind. I have a friend who's colorblind, and I believe that he uses one of these. But if you click Ultimaker Dark, it won't make these changes right away. But if we close out of Cura and then reopen it, now it is in dark mode. So this just makes it easier to view. Anyways, great job today. I know this was a long one. We went through a lot of content. Great job. If you're here, definitely congratulations. You're awesome. But yeah, post what you're working on. And yeah, if this was helpful, if you know someone who could benefit from this, definitely share it with them. I want to get this message out to as many people as possible, and I want to really break down the barrier for beginners to get into 3D printing. So thank you so much, and I will see you in the next lesson.